Yes. No.
Did any of you think, how many of you thought I was saying you could lose your salvation?
No. Me. Meryl did. No.
All right, to clarify, you cannot lose your salvation, even, in my view, even if you lose your faith. That was the point of 1 Timothy 2:12, that if I'm faithless, he cannot deny himself. He promised to save me, so he can't deny himself, even if I quit believing. Does that help? She's looking at me.
So if you lose your faith, does that just mean you quit following? If you lose your faith, if you lose your faith, does that mean you just quit following the Lord?
Sure.
So you live a carnal life. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying that it is possible, and by the way, I'm in the minority. Remember I said that? I used the 12 spies, and this is the minority report. Most preachers would say that if you said, I trusted Christ when I was young, I'm now old and I don't believe it anymore, that you were never saved to begin with. That's Calvinism. Arminianism would say, you were saved, but you lost it.
So can you be a Calminian?
Yes, and that's what I am. I've actually used that phrase.
That's what we were.
Right. I'm actually neither. I'm a little bit of some, a little bit of the other. And I was this close once to being a 5-point Calvinist. I could never accept limited atonement. But I came real close. And then, as I've studied the scripture, I've more and more gotten away from it. I do not tend to think theologically. We had lunch with a fellow this week, and he thinks theologically. I tend to think in passages. So the difference between exposition and theology is theology does two things. It systematizes. So take a topic, the judgment seat of Christ. And so you look up all the passages on the judgment seat of Christ and you systematize it and you come up with a theology. The spiritual life, salvation, all those are theological topics. Then you discover that there are things you don't know. So what theology tends to do is fill in the gaps. And that's where you get theological differences a lot. So I don't tend to think, and so what happens with a lot of people is they study theology, and then they come to the Bible, and it's what I preached tonight about the bugler, and the fire call and the church call. For example, let's say you grow up in a Lutheran church, and you went into the ministry. You went to a Lutheran college, and you went to a Lutheran seminary, and you became a Lutheran pastor. You open your Bible, you've been in the ministry 20 years, and you read it, and you see the word baptism, what are you going to think? The sprinkling of a baby. That's all you've ever heard. That's all you know. And you can't deny it. You lose your church and your retirement fund. And I don't mean to be picking on the Lutherans, but it's true of the Baptists too.
You're describing us.
Yeah. So I was an evangelist, as you know, for 13 years. I had to sign a doctrinal statement. I was in and out of every kind of church. Last time I counted, I've been in 24 different denominational churches, most of which were Baptist. There are 29 different Baptist groups. I'm not exaggerating. That's an exact number in one book. And so I didn't have to, all I did was study. I didn't care. I don't care what the book says. I don't have a point of view. I just want to know what it says. So I set aside the theology. Matter of fact, a lot of the theology I was taught I questioned. And in studying the scriptures have become more conservative than the people that taught me theologically. So anyway, I'm beating my gums up here. So I tend to think in terms of passages and not theologically. I don't come to it trying to look for theology or seeing my theology in it. I'm going to say one more thing and I'll let you ask questions. I once heard Henry Wurmbrand. Have you ever heard that name? He was a Lutheran pastor that was imprisoned, persecuted. I heard him on tape, and he said, when you hear a sermon, you are 4 parts removed from truth. Then he explained, God is truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Bible is truth. Thy word is truth. John 17. So the Bible is truth about truth. Theology is truth about truth about truth. And a sermon is truth about truth about truth about truth. So you're 4 parts removed from the truth. That really helped me. So when I listen to somebody, I want to, did you show me that in the Bible? I want chapter and verse. I tell my people in my church, don't believe anything I say unless I show it to you in the Bible. If I can't show it to you in the Bible, you know. On the other hand, if I show it to you in the Bible, anyway. So that whole thing of can you lose your faith is a minority report, and I came to that not because of a theological position, but because I found it in the text. And most people have a hard time digesting that, by the way, you know. All right, questions?
Mike,
Yes, sir.
Because you were on that passage in James tonight, being quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Hello, Disney.
Would you expand on Proverbs 1? You know, the first 6 verses mentions the term understanding 3 times before you get to the big verse, 1:7. The term understanding from the Hebrew, would you expand on that for us?
I'm not sure I remember that word, but I remember the prologue of Proverbs. I've gone through every verse in Proverbs. The first 6 verses are called the prologue, the introduction to the book. And it gives the purpose of the book. And let's read the passage, it'll kind of jog my memory. But I know there are 2 things, there are 2 purposes to Proverbs. That's a real interesting passage, by the way. And then I'll comment on the word understand. All right. He says, verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive instruction of wisdom, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young men, knowledge and discretion. All right? Notice it says 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Did you see that? Those are purpose clauses. And the word, as I recall, the word understand and knowledge and those words are synonyms. I don't recall that those words have a great deal of different meanings. They might be a slight nuance, and I need to look that up. And I asked Mary Ann if she would take notes. Tell me to look up understand. And tomorrow night, I'll look up the Hebrew word and see if there's a nuance. But what I want to show you is basically he's saying, I'm writing this so that you would have wisdom. And I think he's using other words to know wisdom and instruction and understanding. And the way the Hebrews write, I see if this were Paul, we would want to make a little distinction out of every word. But Hebrew doesn't do that. And you've got to be very careful when you're explaining the Psalms. In Hebrew poetry, the second line is explaining the first line. Or it's either a contrast to, there's several things, but he's not necessarily saying something different in the second line. It's poetry. Well, that's similar to what's happening here. But he gets down to the end of this and he says, a wise man will hear and increase in learning. That's what I preached tonight. And a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. Then he goes back to 2, to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. Now, the way this is divided, there's basically 2 things going on here. I want you to understand wisdom, but I've thrown in here some enigmas, some riddles. So one of the purposes of Proverbs is to make you think. And if you don't think, you're going to mess up. So The word enigma and riddle is the point. But I'll look up tomorrow.
The way I've always understood it is that it was applied wisdom. I mean, it's like the word heed you were just talking about, and James, you hear it and you heed it. Now you understood it. Now you're ready to act on it.
Right.
And make it part of you. That's the way I understood it, but I was just interested in your take.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, this is a real interesting thing. Well, so I don't see it in here. In Proverbs, there's a wise man and a fool, a scorner and a simpleton. When I was a youth worker, I'm trying to find something biblical to teach teenagers, and I somehow stumbled upon, in Proverbs, there's something called a simpleton. The simpleton, the Hebrew word is open. They're open to all stimuli. They are impressionable. They are 13-year-olds. That's not in the Hebrew word, that's the application. They are naive. And so they are open. And part of the purpose of Proverbs is to give wisdom to the simple. All right? I thought the word simple was in here, but I don't see it. Maybe, yeah, it is. It's verse 5. To give prudence to the simple. There it is. Verse 4. To give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. One of the purposes of Proverbs is Solomon is writing this to his son, and he wants to give his son wisdom, and he's probably a teenager. The wisest man in the world did some very stupid things. He married, had, what? 300 wives and 700 concubines.
That's stupid.
Talk about it. Took a lot of wisdom to know how to handle that, I think. All right, I'm babbling up here. Who's got a question? Question. Who's got a question? Yes?
The other night you talked about, the other night you talked about how we will be rulers in heaven based, that may be a reward that we have. And I'm wondering, what do you think that we're going to be ruling?
What are we going to be ruling?
Who or what?
Oh, who we're going to be
What
ruling?
will we be ruling over?
Those who don't qualify to be rulers are going to be ruled. By the way, that's a good question, and I don't know that I can point to a verse that says specifically. However, there's simply no question. Jesus made very clear that we're going to rule with him. Paul refers to being ruling and reigning with him. The passage I read in 1 Timothy talks about that. So apparently, we're going to have glorified bodies. We're going to live on the earth, and we're going to, my brother has bugged me to death. What are we going to do in heaven? What are we going to do in heaven? I don't know. I told you everything I know in the Bible. It ain't much, We're going to be with the Lord. That ought to be enough. But apparently, there's going to be organized structure, cities, and, that's fascinating. When I think of heaven, here's what I think of. And when I think of the kingdom, this is what I think of. God said to Abraham, get out of Ur. Don't take your family with you. Follow me. And he straightway stood up, took his family, and moved a little bit. He got to Haran, and his father died, and then he moved on. He had no idea where he was going. Had no clue as to what was going to be there when he got there. He just followed the Lord. And I think heaven is like that. I think God gave him just enough information to know to go. And he gets there, and he gets into a squabble with Lot. And Abraham says, you pick the best, and wow. And God appears to him and says, as far as you can see, north, east, south, and west, it's yours and your descendants. He didn't know that when he left. Had no idea when he got there. And so I think we journey by faith. And that's part of it. That's the best I can do.
Mike, could I add just one thing, because you might maybe touch on this Saturday morning with the guys, but We just studied this last Sunday in Sunday school about what they call the Genesis mandate, as some Bible scholars put it, in 128. The Genesis mandate contains 4 issues in 128. God said to them to be fruitful and multiply, number 1. Then he said to fill the earth, number 2. Thirdly, he said to subdue it. And fourthly, he said rule over all of it. So the very idea of ruling starts right there in Genesis 1. It's the Genesis mandate to Adam and Eve and to their generations to follow, to be ruling from the get-go. We are God's stewards of his kingdom. And that's, I mean, right there from the first part of the book.
I like that a lot. Right on, right on. And we're to rule. In the garden, animals, the ground, science. I think we rule. Technology, medicine, we rule.
What do a lot of well-meaning Christians get wrong?
She's
She's got enigmatic questions.
What do well-meaning Christians get wrong? Is that your question?
Good question.
You name it,
Yeah,
Well-meaning.
you name it, and some Christians have messed it up.
Intentional.
All right, let me talk about that for a minute. I talked a minute ago about theology. If you organize the topics of the Bible, you're going to come up with a couple of very basic ideas. I'm going to reduce theology to just 1, 2, 3. The book is about God. So, what does the book say about God? The book is about man. And the book is about man's relationship with God. Now, those topics are the 3 main topics of the Bible. Now, under those, you've got the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, the work of each, the person of each, the Trinity itself, the attributes of God. You can organize all that material, and that's what theology books do. And then you've got man. And the doctrine of man is basically he's created in the image of God, didn't evolve, and he fell, so he's depraved. So you go to a theology book and peel it open, and it's going to divide the doctrine of man. It's going to give it a fancy name, because theologians make simple things complicated. So instead of saying the doctrine of man, meaning generically men and women, it's going to say anthropology. So the study of anthropology, theologically, is man has got dignity, made in the image of God, he's depraved, he's a sinner. Then there's the doctrine of salvation, the relationship between the two. So it's salvation and the spiritual life. And ultimately we're going to be with the Lord. So, you know, you could throw in here the future. It's called eschatology. Man's relationship with God in the Old Testament is what the Mosaic Law was about. That's Israel. In the New Testament, there's the church, and that's all about our relationship. So we can study the church, called ecclesiology and eschatology, and those are the areas of theology. That's it. Not all that big a deal. Now you ask, what could you mess up? All of it. Well-meaning Christians mess up it all. One of the most well-known Bible teachers in America, and I disagree, on salvation. What must I do to be saved? A simple thing like that. And I was listening to him one day, and he's a good man. I've had conversations with him. He's a godly man. I don't question any of that. He's a gifted teacher. And I was listening to him one day, and I thought, you know, there's a sense in which he and I have a totally different perspective of God. I think of God as a loving father, and his view of God is a stern, judgmental cop sometimes. So there's the doctrine of God, and he's well-meaning, and I think he skews the perception of God. I think that the average well-meaning theologian and Christian has no comprehension of just how depraved we really are. I mean, humans are depraved. We put on a great facade, especially when we come to church. But I mean, we are as given, I used to say, given the right set of circumstances, we're capable of anything. We live in a civilized society, and, but what's going on in the world right now is unimaginable to me. Beheading people? Are you kidding me? Killing children? Women? Innocent people? This is Holocaust kind of stuff. The Holocaust? That'd be one of the most unimaginable things in history. Well, we're all depraved. What I hear, you don't know how depraved people are. Let two people go through a divorce and fight over the kids or the money. Then you'll find out just how depraved people are. She's going to keep his kids from him just to get at him. She now hates him. There's a verse in the Bible that says the hate with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he loved her. Love can turn into hate. And now she just wants to get at him, and she uses the kids. How horrible is that? That's man's inhumanity to man. But the two things I put up there are salvation and the spiritual life. What must I do to be saved? Now, this congregation ought to know that, right? Give me one word. What must I do to be saved? What's the word? I split this church. I asked the most simple question, and I got two answers. Believe and trust. Well, that's the right answer, by the way. But just listen to what the average preacher says. They will say everything but that. There's one book written in the Bible to get people saved. You know what that book is? John. That's right. What does that book say? Believe. The word believe appears in that book 100 times. I counted it. 100 times. So John 3:16, that's all you got to know. What does God say? Believe. And that word means trust. He doesn't say just believe, he says believe on. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, to believe on.
Is turning from sin added to that?
Yes. All right, so listen to preachers. And they say, accept Jesus. What does that mean? And where did you get that? Well, ask Jesus to come into your heart. Where in the world did you get that? Oh, I got a verse for that. Revelation 3:20. Turn to Revelation 3:20.
We know where you're going. I know.
Turn to Revelation 3:20.
Shut up.
You didn't teach them this, did you? No. Behold, I stand. You got to look at it. Look at your Bible. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, what will I do? What does your book say? I will come. What's the next word? What's the next word? Does it say into or into? How many of you got a King James translation? How many of you got a New King James translation? How many got a New American Standard? How many got an NIV? You see all the different translations? Every translation in here, anybody got a different translation I hadn't mentioned? All right? Every translation I mentioned says in to as two different words. Has anybody got a translation where it says into as one word? This verse is not saying, I will come inside you. That would be into one word. It says, I'll come in the door and stand before you, which is the meaning of the Greek word to. And this is not just every English translation I've ever looked at, and I've looked at all of them that I can find, say into. I've never found one that says into one word. The Greek text says, eis erchomai pros. That means come in. That's all in one word in Greek, and stand before. There is a Greek construction that says eis erchomai eis, which means inner. And every time that's used in the New Testament, it's used of demon possession. This is not talking about entering a person. Besides, when I get there, when he gets there, when he does this, whatever it is, what's he going to do? Read the verse. He's going to save you? No. I'm not talking about salvation. You're going to have lunch. We're going to do dinner together.
Potluck dinners, there's your proof.
So what's that? Fellowship.
Well, isn't he even talking to Christians?
Exactly. It's talking to Christians. Read verse 19. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Does he rebuke unsaved people? Does he chasten? The Greek word means child train. No, you're right. Dead on. All right, but the point is, what do well-meaning Christians mess up? Salvation. Ask Jesus to come into your heart. Accept Christ. Give your life to Christ. That's exactly backwards. You don't give your life to Christ to get saved. He gave his life to get you saved. You got it backwards. Or here's one of my favorites. Give your heart to the Lord. What's he going to do with the dirty thing if you gave it to him? Now forgive me. But you ask. Then, if that isn't bad enough, we're going to then talk about how to be spiritual. Now here's what preachers do. You got to dedicate your life to Christ. You got to surrender. You got to totally surrender. You got to completely surrender. You got to consecrate. You ever heard that kind of preaching? And you got to come forward to do it.
Not here.
You know, one of the first things that occurred to me is I used to give all those kind of invitations, and the same people kept coming to rededicate or dedicate, you know? It didn't take. And then one day it occurred to me, the Bible doesn't talk like that. The Bible doesn't talk like that at all. In fact, it says the very opposite. And here's what I mean. To say come dedicate is to imply that you could do something that's going to make you spiritual in a moment. I'm going to do something, it's saying, get married, go through the ceremony, as if that's going to make you happily married. No. It's the marriage, folks. It's what you do after the ceremony that makes the marriage, right? So, an act is not where the emphasis is in the New Testament. The emphasis in the New Testament is on the action, not the act. So if you constantly preach the act, people are going to run down and do the act and realize 20 minutes later, or better yet, next Tuesday, it didn't work. And they're going to do it again, and they're going to do it again, and they're going to get frustrated. Now, if you want to make it an act, I'll give you the act. Decide that you're going to be obedient. So that communicates linear action, obedience. Now the verse that's used to refute me, or my position, is, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body a living sacrifice. Isn't that an act? No. As a matter of fact, if you understand the book of Romans, that's a summary. As a matter of fact, present your bodies. I read you the verse tonight when we went to Romans 6. Present your body as instruments to obey. Romans 12, 1 and 2 is a summary of everything he said in 6, 7, and 8. And presenting your body is explained in chapter 6 as presenting your body to obey. So it's linear. You don't do it all at once, like you don't do all of married life and the wedding ceremony. You do it day by day by day by day by day by day. It's being constantly obedient. So that's what they mess up. They mess up the two. I used to say I could split any Christian school right down the middle by asking the faculty two questions. What must I do to be saved, and what must I do to be spiritual? And they would not give me the answer, the same answer. I'm certain, and I've spoken in many Christian schools, I am certain that if I got the faculty together and asked those two questions and told them to write them down, the answers would differ. I'm certain of it. I don't know of a school in existence where they'll all give me the same answer, especially to the second question.
So trust and obey.
Trust and obey. Now that music to my...
There's no other way.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any significance to God's having chosen salt for Lot's wife when she turned her face? Ooh. Or is it?
How did you come up with this?
You wonder why I grew up the way I did.
I'm sorry?
We visited Israel, they make a big deal about it. I just want to know what you're.
When you went to Israel, they took you down to the Dead Sea, and they showed you that the whole area down there is salt. So, did you float?
Yes.
When you went, did you float in the Dead Sea?
There's a different area too that Paul, our guide, showed us and said, this appears to be in the area where.
Right. It's at the very end of the Dead Sea. Been there. Did you float in the Dead Sea? It's 33% salt.
She didn't this time.
Did you float?
Yeah, Nate and I went.
Did you float? Yeah, you can float in it. It's,
I
I have no idea why she turned to salt, but I am very aware that we're down there where they think the 5 cities were that were destroyed. They think are under the lower end of the Dead Sea. What happens in Palestine is there's a Sea of Galilee up north, and the Jordan River comes out of the Sea of Galilee and worms its way, I mean literally like this, into the Dead Sea. That is 210 miles in a canoe. And I forgot, it's some real short distance by the way the bird flies. But it's a steep drop, and when you get to the Dead Sea, it's 1,300 feet below sea level. And there's no outlet, so it's dead. Keep that in mind. It's dead because there's no outlet. You gotta let this stuff out, and the best way to learn is to teach. So you let it out and you grow. So they didn't let it out, and it's dead. And it's salt. It's 33% salt, and you can literally, no matter how much you weigh, float in it. And so the idea is they think that the cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities were under the south end of the Dead Sea. I heard recently that somebody has now decided they found some stuff on the east side of the Dead Sea that they think might be the cities that were destroyed. But why it was salt, I have no idea. And I don't know how I would go. I've been through Genesis. I don't know. I don't recall anybody trying to explain that. That one, I don't know how to look up. That one, I don't know.
The New Jerusalem is apparently described in Revelation where we're all going to live, and it's described with all the gates and the. Are we all going to be urban dwellers? Yes.
Somebody else, somebody else.
Who said
Oh, that's cute.
Stifle yourself, Edith.
I got a million of them. No.
I do not know. I do not know. I don't know. There's going to be a new earth. So I don't know what's going to be on the new earth.
So are we ruling on the new earth or this earth? Because there is a.
The new earth
there's
is
a
the
group out of
eternal.
Kansas City that believes that
Yeah,
this earth
yeah,
is
right,
going to
right.
be redone. And
The ruling and reigning is on this earth after it comes back, and then there's the new earth and the new Jerusalem. So,
But that whole teaching by the International House of Prayer, just because I don't like them, but anyway, that whole teaching is unbiblical because they don't acknowledge the new heaven and new earth at all.
who does it?
The International House of Prayer, the group out of Kansas City.
Oh, yeah, that's a Pentecostal group.
Yeah.
Yeah. They deny that?
Yeah, they denied it to me over the phone. I called them.
All right, Kelly, well-intended, messing it up, your brother got it. Another illustration. Interesting. Why do they deny that?
They basically say we're ruling over this earth is going to be, we're going to recreate and rebuild this earth, and it's going to be all done, and they don't acknowledge Revelation 22:21 all. Which is totally, they say, no, this is going to be the new heaven and the new earth once we rebuild it.
Oh, boy. All right.
Do you think Christians are going to have to live through the tribulation, all that stuff?
He thinks in passages, not theologically.
But I thought theologically about that one because there are passages. That's one of those doctrines I was taught and threw out.
Okay.
I questioned all the prophecy while I was in seminary and read some stuff that jolted me, didn't know any better, threw it all out, everything, and then I worked my way back through it. I am pre-trib. And the reason I am pre-trib is this. Number one is there is in the Bible the doctrine called imminency. The Lord is at hand. The Lord is standing at the door. That's James 5. The Lord is at hand is used several times. I have a long list of commentaries in my notes of 1 Thessalonians 4, where people that don't believe in pre-trib rapture say that that phrase means the Lord could come at any minute. In 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul says, and we which are alive and remain. Ooh, nobody questions that he included himself. We. Well, the Lord didn't come back while you were alive. So I have commentators that say Paul thought the Lord was coming back and he was wrong. So what theologians say is that no, he's not saying that. He's saying he could, but he might not. So there's a difference between imminent and soon. If I said this meeting is going to end soon, that means it's going to end shortly. If I said it's going to end imminently, it could end after this question. It could end in the middle of this question. Okay? So the Bible is full of imminency, and that's the doctrine that really tipped me over. The second is 1 Thessalonians 1:9 and 5:10 says he delivers us from wrath. And wrath is the day of the Lord, and the day of the Lord is the tribulation. The sealed judgments in Revelation 6 say the day of his wrath has come. So I believe wrath begins with the day of the Lord, which begins, I'm not going to take you through these passages, I'm just outlining. The day of the Lord begins at the beginning of the tribulation, and so we're delivered from that. 1:9 and 5:10.
Awesome.
The third, good. The third is, oh shoot, it's in Revelation. What's that? I don't believe it. 3:10. This one I fought. I didn't like this one. I didn't like this one at all. And then I went through the book of Revelation verse by verse, and I got to it, and I couldn't wiggle out of it. Listen to this. Because you've kept the word of my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole world. The trial, tribulation, that's going to come upon the whole world. Hello, I'm locked up now. I'm going to deliver you from the hour, the time. I'm not going to deliver you by taking you through it. I'm going to deliver you from it. Then there's other stuff, like the word church is mentioned, I think, 30 times in the book of Revelation. It's mentioned over and over and over and over and over again in the first 3 chapters. You get to chapter 4, and it's never mentioned again until the end of chapter 22. It disappears. The tribulation, the introduction to the tribulation begins in chapter 4. And it's just not there. It disappears. Now that one isn't, that's an argument from silence. It's not the best kind of argument. So those 3 arguments are what convert me. Also, you can't be post-trib. That's impossible. Because in Matthew 25, he comes down, and the first thing he does is separate the sheep from the goats. Well, if the rapture was post-trib, it would be like this. The sheep would go up, turn around, and come down with him. then the rapture would separate the sheep from the goats, but he comes down and then separates the sheep from the goats, so it cannot be post-trib. And the only other trib is a pre-mid-trib. Nobody believes that anymore. There's a pre-wrath. I know the guy that propagated that one. I looked at it. It wasn't persuasive to me. So I'm shut up. Besides, we're to look for the Lord, not the Antichrist. If it isn't pre-trib, then we need to be looking for the covenant between the Antichrist and Israel at the beginning of the tribulation. But I'm not looking for the Antichrist, I'm looking for Christ.
So where do you think the Pope fits in?
Hey, where does the Pope fit in? The Protestants and Baptists are not Protestants. We disagreed with the Protestants. The Protestants are the John Calvin, John Knox, Martin Luther, Anglicans in England. But they all had state churches. The Baptists stood up and said, we don't believe in having a state church, so we're the radical Protestants. That's what they call us in secular literature. So we're not Protestants. The Protestants said the Pope was the Antichrist. But that's because they were fighting the Pope. I do not subscribe to that. And I'm not sure where the Pope fits in that. However, in the last year, I did an in-depth, detailed study of every aspect of the theology of Roman Catholicism. And it is on videotape on my church website. There are 12 lectures. And I go into every aspect of the theology of Catholicism, if you're interested.
What's the website?
Lindleychurch.com.
L-I-N?
Lindley.
I don't think it's
So Lindley,
confusion. I think it's just the fact that the Pope is coming out and he's supposed to be such a pious man of God, and the things that he's coming out with go against the Bible. And this just is wrong.
Let me tell you what let me make a couple of comments about prophecy in general. One is that through history, in our lifetime, they make all kinds of speculations as who is the Antichrist, down including Ronald Reagan. They take the letters, and make them numerical numbers and add them up, and it's 666. Ronald Reagan is the Antichrist. Henry Kissinger is supposed to be the Antichrist. I was in seminary in the 60s, and I had a little country church, just like this. This reminded me of my church. And I was preaching through the book of Revelation. And I got tired of preaching judgment, 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 judgment. I thought, my people are going to fire me. Judgment, judgment. When I get to chapter 6, and man, it's judgment all the way to chapter 18. So I went to the library and thought I'd get a fresh perspective. I looked at Harry Ironside. Now, the king of the East that comes across the Euphrates River is supposed to be, well, I was being taught, China. Harry Ironside, who lived during World War II, said it was Japan. And that really set me back. I'm going to be very careful making pronouncements. So I got up in the pulpit and said, this is what I know for a fact. The king of the East is coming across the Euphrates with this huge army. What is it? 100 million or something? It's some huge thing. It may be China. It could be India or Pakistan. I don't know. What I know is the king of the East is coming across the Euphrates. So that's the way I teach prophecy. I heard the other day of a meeting, I forgot the name of it, where the Catholics, some Protestants, and the Muslims all got together in a unified prayer meeting. I think that's where we're headed. I think the Antichrist will come out of that.
Chris Love.
Chris Love, that's it. The other thing is, in the 80s, I preached through Daniel. And everybody wants to know, where's America in prophecy? Is it the eagle? No, no. It's not, and the bear's not Russia. So where's America? I mean, in the 80s, we're the world power. And I got to the end of one sermon and said, I don't know, but I'm going to give you some ideas. Number one is America's been completely destroyed. Number two is that it's part of the King of the West, it's part of Europe. And three is that America has decided that America then has an isolationist policy and won't get involved in the Middle East. I said that, it's on tape in the 80s. Sound familiar now? Who would have imagined that the United States of America would do what we've done to Israel 10 years ago? Who would imagine 5 years ago that the Supreme Court would have said there could be homosexual marriage? And if I don't stop, I'm going to start preaching. It's unimaginable. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians, the spirit of lawlessness is already in the world. Well, it's going full bore. If it was going 10 miles an hour, it's now going 90. I mean, it's just escalating as fast as we can think. Let me ask you a question. Is it easier to witness today or harder than, say, 20 years ago in Minnesota? Are people more receptive to going to church now or less receptive than they were 20 years ago?
Depends on the church. Depends on
Yeah.
what the church offers.
Yeah,
If it's-
yeah.
if
But
it's-
most people,
Most people are not.
you used to could bring up church and you'd at least get into a conversation. My wife and I, we live in Los Angeles, so I mean, that may be part of it, but you bring up something spiritual and they slam the door. I mean, what they do is they give you the silent treatment. You say, what do you do? Well, I'm a pastor. Well, boy, that'd open the conversation. My mother used to be a Sunday school teacher. Really? What kind? You know, I'll forget. What do you do? I'm a pastor. Who's your favorite football team? They changed the subject. Incredible.
One of the things I've noticed, Mike, is there's also a lot of difference in it, that when I would go out and do a visit back when I was at Word of Life, I would take,
Give me the mic so everybody can understand.
I'd go out on visitation, and I'd sit down with somebody. The Bible was accepted as an authoritative document to go to. And now I have to convince them that it's an authoritative document before I can use it as an authoritative document that contains truth.
Yeah, I know. I know. And it's going to get worse, folks, before it gets better. And it's going to take the Lord coming back to get better. All right, we're about ready to go. Anybody got another burning question? Good.
Mary Magdalene, where does it say in the Bible that she was a prostitute?
It does not.
Thank you.
Abs, did you hear the question? The Bible does not say Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. It does not say that. She was not. That is something somebody conjured up a couple of hundred years after the New Testament. That's not Bible.
Somebody had said that she had 7 demons in there, and so she could hardly.
Give her the mic.
Someone had said that she had 7 demons that were removed from her, and if she had that many, that she
Yeah.
couldn't possibly
Yeah, but it
be a
doesn't say.
loving person. So.
But it doesn't say she was a harlot. Yeah, yeah. I mean, she had problems, but we don't know. Let me put it like that. We
She
don't.
was a sinner, but aren't we all?
She was a sinner, but we don't know that she
We
was a
all
harlot.
are.
Right, exactly, exactly. Boy, that's the doctrine of depravity. That's right. And we don't know how. The heart is deceitful of all things. Who can know it? I knew a Christian psychiatrist once said, he quoted that verse to me, Jeremiah. The heart is deceitful above all things, and we deceive ourselves more than anybody else. That's what he said. All right, anybody got another question?
Are we gonna do this again? The questions?
I'm sorry,
Are
what?
we gonna do this, are you gonna do this again?
Let's vote. Y'all want to do it again?
Right now.
The answer is yes.
Then I'll save my question.
Oh, don't do that.
That's
One
what you said
more.
last
Okay.
night.
Okay, my question is, and it's not just from Pastor Gary, but you don't hear anybody talk about the alternative to heaven, hell, or any of, is that we're afraid to scare people into towards
That is
Christ?
a very good observation. I had a lady in my church say the same thing about me. You never preach on hell. And my answer to her was, I teach the Bible.
Right.
And so I go through the Bible book by book, and every time I come to hell, I preach on it, you know. It just isn't mentioned all that much. Now, they